What connection does Pittsburgh and Spider-Man Brand New Day have in common?
Just hit me with a van!
Quit your whimpering.
Stick with me and hopefully you'll see. In the 1990s, Nicolas Cage was going to play Superman, and Pittsburgh was going to be Metropolis. For a comic book loving kid in the 90s, this was a big deal. Then Kevin Smith had to write about attack polar bears.
And I was like, polar bears? He said, yeah, have them fight some polar bears. Polar bears, the fiercest killers in the animal kingdom.
A giant mechanical spider.
And he's like, do you know anything about spiders? And I said, no. And he said, well, they're the fiercest killers in the insect kingdom.
For Barbra Streisand's hairdresser / ex-husband, and it never happened. A few years later, Pittsburgh featured prominently in Inspector Gadget, and then in The Dark Knight Rises. I know someone who was an extra in that scene. For The Dark Knight Rises, it was one of 3 cities used to create Gotham. What other films were shot in Pittsburgh? Let me know in the comments below if you know. At the time, I actually had a film festival, and we were running an event in Oakmont, Pennsylvania. Oakmont's kind of down the river a ways from Pittsburgh, between my parents' house in the woods and the city itself. I printed our special edition comic book for the event at a print shop in downtown Pittsburgh. In the back alley of this print shop was where they were filming the tumbler sequence, like the part where there's different tumblers and one has a bomb, one doesn't, and they're trying to figure out which one it is. That was literally filming in the back alley of the print shop that my comic book for this event was printed. Then, upon my return to LA, I went to the art gallery at the time that I was a part of, and I couldn't park in my normal parking lot that I would use because it was full of SWAT vans and other vehicles that said Gotham PD on the side. They were getting ready for filming. Literally the day I left Pittsburgh and got back. It's pretty crazy. Pittsburgh's had some pretty great success in being a filming location, and superhero films in particular. It's pretty cool. However, my favorite superhero of all time, Spider-Man, he's never visited the Burgh. At least in film he hasn't. He has in the funny books, which is what old people like me call comic books. This issue is far less famous for the fact that it's set in Pittsburgh, and far more famous for what happens on the very last panel. But we'll get to that, because I care, at least in this instance, more about Pittsburgh than I do Spider-Man. But that's a hard one if you had to ask me to pick. It's like, which kid do I love more? Both.
Which one is your favorite?
Oh, gee, that's almost like asking a parent who's his favorite child. But maybe I like Spider-Man a little bit better.
And we'll also get to the thematic connections to Spider-Man Brand New Day. You can't bring up Pittsburgh and comic books and not mention Jim Shooter. Shooter famously became a freelancer for DC at only 14 years old. However, his real impact in comics came in 1978 when he was named editor-in-chief at Marvel Comics. Stan Lee was off in Hollywood, and Shooter saw the place as a mess with missed deadlines causing overruns on books. Shooter, being a big guy as if he were forged in a Pittsburgh steel mill, could intimidate people. And I think he used that to kind of crack down on things a bit. Eventually his reputation grew enough that years later I saw him multiple times at conventions and was too nervous to talk to him. I'm sorry to admit that now that he's passed. Because hey, we could talk about Pittsburgh or something, but I was honestly scared to talk to Jim Shooter. As to Shooter, some people loved him, some people hated him. To quote the Comics Journal obituary for Shooter, the mid to late 70s was a tumultuous time for Marvel. After Stan Lee's departure as editor-in-chief, and for the next few years, several different creators filled that role. The article goes on to say, Shooter quickly realized that Marvel was a mess, with constantly missed deadlines that resulted in late charges for some books, and a comics company that lacked a coherent editorial philosophy. Shooter cracked down on his creatives to make them more deadline conscious, and instituted strong editorial control over the book's content, which caused some grumbling in the ranks and led to Shooter's negative reputation among many Marvel freelancers who'd become accustomed to a more laissez-faire attitude. Now, a lot of people felt supported by Shooter and flourished in that environment, but some did not. And as to Shooter's creative impact and his impact in general on comics, the Comics Journal obituary was pretty honest how they felt. None of Shooter's new creations were especially memorable, and although some of them were used in later mainstream Marvel titles, they failed to achieve lasting success and are barely remembered today. However, Shooter was successful in creating the first company-wide crossover event. Now, this isn't about all that. This is about Starbrand. Well, it's not really about Starbrand, it's about Spider-Man. But first, we need to talk a little bit about Starbrand. Starbrand was basically a confusing version of the Green Lantern. But the key here is that Kenneth Connell, who became Starbrand, was branded by the Star And he also worked for KDKA News in Pittsburgh. He was a cameraman. I found this image forever ago online on something, I don't know how, and have been waiting forever to use it. So I finally am writing something to talk about it because I've never bothered to talk about the new universe. The Comics Journal obituary said of the new universe, his attempt to vastly expand the Marvel universe with a whole new slate of characters in his new universe title was a bust. Within a year, 4 of those 8 new titles were canceled, and although some of them ran for 32 issues, they were eventually canceled too, due to the pressure from Marvel's owners who wanted the focus to remain on their established characters. Which brings us to The Pit.
And if you jump on my shift, that's just rude, man.
No, not that Pit. And also, hopefully that one has a different ending, as The Pit with Starbrand and the new universe resulted in a giant hole where Pittsburgh once was. The Pit was released in December 1987. Fortunately, Spidey visited in June of 1987. Also, it's a universe outside of Marvel's continuity, so his visit doesn't matter. And interestingly, Jim Shooter was fired on April 15th, 1987. I don't know what all this means, but 1987 was a heck of a year for Pittsburgh and comics, I guess. In part of their obituary for Shooter, the Comics Journal recounted a story that was kind of the breaking point for everything with Shooter and Marvel. And like Brand New Day, it also involved the Hulk and some destruction. After Byrne turned an issue of The Incredible Hulk, number 320, where each page was a splash page, which incidentally was potentially groundbreaking when they did it with it at the Superman less than 10 years later. Something that freaked out editor Denny O'Neil. O'Neil assumed that Shooter would nix such a radical departure from the Marvel standard, and summarily rejected it. Outraged, Byrne quit on the spot and even called Marvel's president, insisting Shooter be fired. This incident, on top of many other clashes with Shooter, resulted in Byrne leaving Marvel to reimagine Superman for DC. And I already mentioned the splash pages of Superman's death, but check out my video where I do bring up Byrne sort of relaunching Superman as part of the overall story to understand the Superman that died. It was John Byrne's Superman that died. So check out that video to understand what I mean by that. This is only one of several extreme examples of Shooter's conflict with his editors and creatives, and it would not be an understatement to say that there were few tears shed when Shooter was shown the door by upper management. Shooter was fired, sending shockwaves throughout the comics industry. Now obviously, you're here for Spider-Man or you're here for Pittsburgh. Maybe both. But you're not here for Jim Shooter. However, I don't think Spider-Man would have visited Pittsburgh if Jim Shooter were not from Pittsburgh. Just my hunch on that. I don't think Pittsburgh would have been featured as the best place to live in a Spider-Man comic if Jim Shooter weren't from there, if your editor-in-chief wasn't a native of Pittsburgh. To kick things off, we need more backstory, but rather than Jim Shooter backstory, this backstory is relevant to the comic's plot. In Amazing Spider-Man 290, Peter asked MJ to marry him. And just for a little bit more context, MJ originally revealed that she had known for a while that Peter was Spider-Man in The Amazing Spider-Man 257. But here now, in issue 292, the lingering question is, will you marry me? The opening splash page features another question. Along with Three River Stadium, it asks the question, what's wrong with this picture? The comic name drops Steelers and the Pirates, who at the time played there. Which brought up the question for me when I read this, does Marvel have its own sports teams or just use ours? And then I watched Brand New Day and saw that Spider-Man is a Mets fan. And it's confirmed here in Spidey Super Stories number 8. On page 1, it tells you that Pittsburgh was selected as like the best place to live by Rand McNally. Now, most of you are my age watching this, but in the event that you're not, Rand McNally was like physical maps. I don't know if they still exist or not, because I, like all of you, use technology. When I was a kid, I have vivid memories of my dad like plotting a map like he were Christopher Columbus about to sail across the Atlantic or something. Road trips were probably terrifying then. The comics writer David Michelin had a good relationship with Shooter, and he said of Shooter, my definition of a good editor is one who pays attention but keeps a loose rein, one who doesn't try to put his/her own personal stamp on everything that crosses their desk. And Jim was like that. I would give him a synopsis of what I wanted to do over the next 3 to 4 issues. He'd read it and make suggestions and requests. Then he'd pretty much leave me alone to write the plots and scripts. I like to think that was because he trusted me as a writer, but whatever the reason, he gave me a great deal of freedom, and that allowed me to retain my enthusiasm, and, I believe, made my work better. Michelin started on issue number 290, Now remember, that's the issue where Peter asked MJ to marry him. He would go on to write The Amazing Spider-Man all the way up to issue 388, the one with like the death of Peter's fake like life model decoy, whatever those, the body double fake parents. But it was very traumatic for Peter. He also wrote my very first issue of Spider-Man, which was also Carnage's first issue of Spider-Man. Or his first appearance, the first that I read. Michelin was a master of Spider-Man as a married man, as a man in a relationship, and he does not get enough credit for what he wrote in that era of Spider-Man. Writing excellent stories with that relationship and that dynamic at its core. That is the Spider-Man that I first fell in love with as a kid, that I still love. Even if Eric Larson doesn't agree. Michelin said of he and Larson's relationship, "Eric hates me and my work, though I have absolutely no idea why. When Jim Salicrup," this is the periodic disclaimer for name pronunciations, including ones I've already said. I'm gonna put my last name on the screen for you right here, without me telling you. How do you say it if you don't know me? So I sympathize with getting your name wrong, and I'm sorry for the names that I am surely saying wrong. Back to the quote. "Suggested Eric and showed me some of his work. I thought it was a bit cartoony, but was distinctive, and a distinctive look was something our readers had become accustomed to with Todd. So I said, okay. Then during our run together, Eric wrote a letter to Wizard Magazine in which he called me a clown. I called my work stupid. I later heard from more than one person that he was going around conventions saying Marvel didn't have any good writers. But at the time, the only Marvel writer he was working with was me. Like I said, I haven't a clue why Eric has this seething dislike for me. But even if I felt the same way about him or his work, I'd never say it in print or in public." That's really sad reading it all aloud. I had it in here as a quote, but I loved those comics too. So they told some beautiful stories together for me. We should also recap what happened in issue 291. MJ says no to Peter's marriage proposal, but then she kind of takes it back and says she doesn't know. MJ is not the model of stability. I have the luxury of reading these books back to back, but oh man, what a cliffhanger. In 290, that question is asked on the last page. In 291, on the first page, you get the answer. But imagine like a month in between those two things, when you're 10 or something. I also want to point out how much I love the sort of pre-blocky John Romita Jr. artwork here. I find it really appealing when looking at it now. It's quite beautiful. I should also point out that this is actually the first issue that takes place in Pittsburgh. 292 gets all the hype, but 291, MJ goes to Pittsburgh and is at the Allegheny County Jail visiting her sister. Meanwhile, Spidey battles the Spider Slayer in New York. And back in the suburbs of Pittsburgh, MJ encounters someone that we only see in shadows, but kind of terrifies her. There's a great moment where Spidey is flipping through the 3 channels that he has, wishing he could afford cable, while carrying this guilt for having been the one who crippled Smythe. He tries to shrug off the guilt and responsibility, sort of justifying things in his head, when MJ calls him weeping. She needs him. She needs not Spider-Man to save her, but Peter Parker. He gets on a flight to the Burgh, happy to be solving a problem as Peter Parker and not Spider-Man. Sort of the idea of a problem he can't punch his way out of. But being Spider-Man, he also feels kind of guilty for leaving the city to go help MJ as Peter Parker. It's really shows you the character of who he is and why he is a great character and a great superhero. But in a way, Spider-Man's going to Pittsburgh to try to escape his problems. And I do that all the time. I go to Pittsburgh to escape my problems, but they just follow me there. The comic was illustrated by artist Alex Salek. This issue was his first issue of Spider-Man ever. After this, he'd do a short run doing issues 296 and 297. The guy who took over with issue 298 was Todd McFarlane. We all know what McFarlane did to revolutionize Spider-Man in terms of flow and movement.
I'm Todd McFarlane.
But what you don't hear about is that Alex Salek went over to work on Web of Spider-Man, which he did for 7 years and nearly 100 issues. I mentioned Michelin and Salek because while Todd McFarlane gets all the hype and the adulation, and he deserves it for what he did with his art in Spider-Man and in comics in general, we forget these people who told way more Spider-Man stories and had way more of an impact on me as a reader. And for me personally, this era defined Spider-Man. Back to our first page. We have the dynamic of Pittsburgh being a wonderful place, but the question, will Spidey die here? Spidey is worried he'll get lost. Yes, Spider-Man, it's Pittsburgh, you will get lost. As he passes Pitt's Cathedral of Learning, which I just happened to see Pitt shared today, which is really crazy. I guess I follow him on Instagram. University of Pittsburgh. And he thinks, and I say he thinks because this is the era of thought balloons, and there are a lot of thought balloons. He reminds us that he asked MJ to marry him. She's visiting her sister, Gail Burns, who is kind of going through some serious stuff. A sister to whom she hasn't spoken in 4 years. I don't have a sister in Pittsburgh, but I do have 3 brothers in the region, one of whom did go to Pitt, and I spent time in the Cathedral of Learning with him when he was in college and I was a kid. And my favorite comic book shop is not far away from the Cathedral of Learning.
We are here on Craig Street in surprisingly beautiful, kind of sunny, nice Oakland, and we're going to go into Phantom of the Attic where my signing is taking place. So Phantom of the Attic here in Oakland, and hopefully you've been able to come by today and say hello. Let's go up and say hi to
Phantom of the Attic in Oakland. Check it out if you're in Pittsburgh. It's a great shop. I have all this footage that I shot when I did a signing there and never posted anything about it. So here's that shop. Great shop. Go visit Phantom of the Attic in Pittsburgh. Back in New York, we see the issue's villain, Alistair Smythe, and his robot Spider Slayer thing. Spidey says, or again, thinks, he doesn't need to worry about New York because it has the National Guard, it has all these cops. What about Daredevil, Fantastic Four, X-Men, the Avengers? Because those guys too, right? Or is it big potatoes, small potatoes kind of thing? In the hotel, watching the news, he learns how much damage the Spider Slayer didn't do in New York and thinks, whew, which I feel like should be an auditory moment of relief, but I'm probably nitpicky. Regardless, he feels relief and can focus on being a good boyfriend / potential fiance to MJ. Meanwhile, in New York, Smythe is loading nefarious cargo, medical equipment that is really his Spider Slayer. In Pittsburgh, but now in the burbs via a cab, MJ is thrilled to see Peter, and Peter sees all the baggage that he is asking to marry. Every one of us comes with it. She introduces Peter to Philip. He introduces himself as MJ's dad. They fight. This is the stuff that makes Spider-Man great. He's about to face the Spider Slayer, who he doesn't know is following him to Pittsburgh, when he's just trying to be a loving, supportive person to show MJ that he's worthy of the answer yes to that proposal question. The website Magazines and Monsters, where I pulled all the quotes from Michelin that you've heard so far. He said this of his take on Spider-Man in his original vision for the wedding. So I came up with a different angle that focused more on the human side of it, that dealt with Peter Parker's worries and self-doubts about whether he was doing the right thing, if he was going to be putting Mary Jane in danger, if he could still be a good husband while running off to fight bad guys all the time, etc. The story was rejected by Shooter. Shot down by Shooter.
Bang, bang.
Shooter plotted his own story, and that was scripted by Michelin. However, returning to our story, as in the comic book story, it's the stuff between the fights that makes it great. Also, the fights make it great, but the stuff between the fights also make it great. And carrying the burden of that great responsibility that comes with that great power, will that hurt the people you love? That's the weight of Spider-Man. That's the weight that you see in this comic and in Brand New Day. Back to issue 292, we see Point State Park, as we learn that MJ's dad was a failed writer who walked out on the family. After MJ's mom passed away, MJ left Gail when Gail was about to have her second kid. Gail holds this against MJ. MJ feels guilty for doing it. It's this circle of guilt and shame. And MJ is also frustrated that her family didn't support her in her struggle to become a success. Is that the Gateway Clipper fleet in the background? Anyway, we learn of Philip's ploy and why Gail is in jail. It's a strange, somewhat convoluted plot to steal valuable manuscripts.
I'm gonna steal the Declaration of Independence.
That's how her dad has been sustaining himself. He hasn't been successful as a writer, but he's had access to valuable manuscripts because of his writing connections somehow. But right now, he needs Gail to get him access to a rare manuscript at Duquesne University, where Gail works as a career counselor. A career counselor who has access to rare manuscripts. MJ decides to help her dad find the manuscript, which shocks both Peter and me. So as I've said, Smythe is following Peter to Pittsburgh. He doesn't know it's Peter. He just knows it's Spider-Man's going to Pittsburgh because he sprayed a tracking agent on Spider-Man's suit when they fought last time.
Me down! The shark repellent bat spray!
Gail is still in Allegheny County Jail, and she's mad at MJ, and it's just boiling over. Families are complex and messy, and this just captures it all. along with stolen manuscripts. Peter gets fired up and tells Gale to help MJ. In the previous issue, this is where Gale laid into MJ for abandoning the family to chase her dreams, sneaking into a basement in a building in Duquesne University, which feels a bit like Creepshow, which I think was CMU. So we're at Duquesne, Cathedral of Learning's Pitt, but it's right by CMU. Creepshow, I think, was at CMU, where George Romero went. But they're in a basement seeking a manuscript. MJ asks Peter, how did you get Gale to help and let them know where the location of the manuscript is? He says they just talked. It shows the dysfunction from which she came, and he didn't. Even though his parents had died, and that's traumatic and heavy, and Uncle Ben later died, and that's traumatic and heavy, Uncle Ben and Aunt May, when they were together and alive, and Aunt May after this, showed him stability, showed him what it is to be a good person, and what it is to be in a healthy relationship. This is a Spider-Man comic after all, so that heartfelt moment where Mary Jane sees the man that Peter really is interrupted by a supervillain. And being honest, one of my least favorite Spider-Man villains, the Spider Slayer, Alistair Smythe. He looks very 70s in this 80s comic, and in the 90s he looked very 90s in the cartoon.
I've designed this operation perfectly, and it's going according to plan.
At one point in Amazing Spider-Man Annual 19, Smythe actually thought that MJ was Spider-Man. I haven't read it, but I must understand what the heck is going on there. Spidey leads the fight outside in order to keep civilians safe. And I know this is like beating a dead horse, but are you taking notes, Superman? Oh, you are taking notes. Maybe overcompensating slightly with a squirrel, but okay. It was cute. My kids liked it. Spidey leads the Spider Slayer to a bridge, the Liberty Bridge. Now, I know you can't avoid a Spider-Man visiting Pittsburgh, battling a villain, and get around the idea of bridges, but this is very ominous. Spider-Man has a very bad history with bridges. I am worried for Spider-Man right now. In that effort to lead Smythe away from civilians, Spidey wasn't as focused on the battles as he can be, and it's kind of getting pummeled at this point. But also, like, the Spider Slayer thing is that it's always, it's Ultroning, getting better every time, each iteration. And there are a lot of iterations of the Spider Slayer. More than I realized. This Spider Slayer gets the upper hand, and by upper hand I mean Spider-Man's head is underwater being held down by the Spider Slayer's robotic hands. Also, this fight reminds me how much this version of the Spider Slayer, at least, I know there's a lot of iterations, but there's some Stiltman energy. MJ rams him with a car, which is awesome, but her car, rental car, stolen car, I don't know, but go MJ. It buys Spider-Man time to recover. And in the greatest moment in Pittsburgh comic book history, and that includes moments that exist only in my head, Spider-Man fights a supervillain on the Duquesne Incline. If Pittsburgh needs a superhero movie, one that's actually set there, as in Pittsburgh as Pittsburgh, not Pittsburgh as Gotham, but Pittsburgh as Pittsburgh. Yins get on that. Spider-Man climbs the incline, climbs Mount Washington, in an effort to gain the high ground.
I have the high ground!
But he gets cut off by the Spider Slayer. Spider-Man gets pummeled on the incline. An iconic moment for this Pittsburgh area native and huge fan of Spider-Man. My favorite superhero, favorite fictional character. It's Peter Parker, it's Spider-Man. But oh, how I wish this battle had a better villain. I see image of Green Goblin, Hobgoblin. I'd settle for Demo Goblin. To protect MJ, who does a good job of protecting herself as she just took a baseball bat from Short Round, who was standing around with a baseball bat. This kid here. Peter rages. Also note, this is the second time where MJ saved Peter. He showed up for her emotionally, and she showed up for him. I have in the script too bad, but I'll spare you that joke. The page ends with a wonderful moment where Peter, as Spider-Man, checks on MJ to see that she's okay. It's a key moment to the development of trust and security in their relationship. Spider-Man makes sure to let Smythe know that he's in big trouble if they have another run-in. Smythe comes back 50 million times. And this Smythe is like the son of the other Smythe, right? Is there more sons that I'm forgetting? But there's a whole legacy of these guys in Spider Slayers. I love the idea of the obsession, but that's not the Osborn family, I'll just say that. But you need a lot of villains to make Spider-Man work. Although Brand New Day showed you what a great villain can be, but it's not obvious, maybe. It's a good movie. Mr. McFeely approaches MJ and says, "Hey, you dropped this precious manuscript."
Mr. McFeely. Come in, Mr. McFeely.
Speedy delivery.
Also, there's a nice detail in the background where the kid has the baseball bat back after this. And he looks ready to slug Smythe, if need be. Back in the suburbs, Peter does mention getting lost downtown to get there. I've been lost in downtown Pittsburgh and will probably be lost the next time I visit downtown Pittsburgh. We get the resolution of the stolen manuscript story, where MJ hands it over to her dad. There's a bit of a twist. She is an actress after all, and she reveals that she's been acting the whole time.
Have I hurt you? Don't be silly. Acting!
And working with the police. They show up to arrest her dad. MJ parts on good terms with her sister and her two nephews. At the old Pittsburgh airport, MJ explains how she's grown up a lot over the last few days. How she can't keep running from responsibility, something that Peter never does. He never runs from responsibility, even though when they don't know he's Spider-Man, everybody thinks he's the most irresponsible person they know. The wonderful tragedy of Spider-Man. But MJ knows better, and we know better. She realizes that she did put everything and everyone aside to make herself a success, to make herself happy. And she says it's time that she makes someone else happy. She says yes in the Pittsburgh airport. Now, it's the old Pittsburgh airport, and I've never been to that airport, but being from the area and living in California now, I spent a lot of time in that airport. So it was strangely emotional seeing this moment between MJ and Peter. I could just relate to having lived a lot of life in the Pittsburgh airport. Which finally brings us to Brand New Day. Now, the parallel isn't the relationship between MJ and Peter of the film and the comics to those two characters, but between Spider-Man and the Punisher. The Punisher in the film is like the MJ of the comic. His life has been ridiculously fraught, incredibly tragic, unbelievably violent. Spidey's had tough moments. Frank knows he's a good kid and describes him as such. Knows the character of who Spider-Man is. And Spider-Man and Peter are one and the same, which is a big plot point in the movie as well, and accepting that. And Frank can see that. Peter sees Frank as the cautionary tale for himself, and Frank sees Peter as the hope of maybe not what he can be, because he's the Punisher now, but maybe what everyone else can be. They can aspire to be Spider-Man, and he can help people do that. Peter is fundamentally good, even in a film where he isolates himself, so focused on the mission of being Spider-Man, as MJ in the comics was focused on the mission of becoming a successful actress. The Punisher of the film is focused on the mission of killing the bad guys so the good guys can live and be safe. Comic MJ and film Frank realize through Peter that they need others. They need some type of family. The beauty is that everyone that knows him, and even those that don't in the city, they love Spider-Man because they see who Spider-Man is, even if they don't know who he is. Peter can't see himself as a good person. Spider-Man is at once who we all are and who we aspire to be. We're sad and alone and we take too much on. We love others but fear that us being us will hurt them, cause them pain and rejection. However, Spider-Man, Peter Parker, he loves the people around him, even people he doesn't know, and he literally fights for them. But not just physically fights, emotionally fights for them. Emotionally stands with them. That's what makes him a hero, beyond being a superhero with powers. Today, I'm a better husband because I read Spider-Man comics where Peter was a good husband. And we're all better people because we watch a movie where he's the right kind of hero.